Hey there, my name is Sidney Shapiro, and welcome to Working with Survey Data Part 2. So if you remember in Part 1, in that video, what we did is we went through and talked about how to put numbers in the survey, enter numbers into Excel. So basically, if you're asking people 1 to 5 questions, like did you have a good time, are you going to come back, did you learn anything? And they give us 3 numbers, essentially. So for example, they gave us a 2, a 3, and a 5. We could put it in there and we could do some different things with it. And in this second part, we're going to get a little more complicated, and we're going to use this tool, which you can use for surveying people. You can also use it to do an evaluation, to gather feedback, or part of your everyday activities. So what we're going to do is I'll show you the sheet that I made. And this sheet here is what we hand out to people after they participate in our workshop. It says, "Thank you for participating in this workshop. Help us improve the next workshop by completing this questionnaire. It's completely voluntary, and your response will remain totally confidential." So we asked them 7 questions. So for example, the content matched the stated goals of the workshop, the facilitator was engaged and kept the workshop interesting, and we adapted these from the YouthREX handout that they do at events. So people check off the boxes between strongly disagree and strongly agree. And our job is to enter these pieces of paper once we have them. Okay, so we have these questions up here. Then we have 2 boxes where people can write whatever they want. The first one is, what are some good things about the workshop? And the second one is, how can we improve this workshop? Then we just want to know, just out of curiosity, how many cups of coffee do people drink at the meeting? And do you want to meet on campus or off campus? Right? So we just want to ask these questions. Now, it could be that there's going to be a relationship between how many coffees people drink and how happy they are with the program or not. We don't know, but these are just some things that we're going to ask people to find out, right? We could also gather people's information. Like, for example, we could ask them to check off their job, or we could ask them their age or age range. We could ask them many different things, right? Depending on what our program is. But for the case of this example, we're just going to look at these items. So to put those in, what I've done is set up a handy-dandy, easy-to-use sheet that looks like this. So basically, I have my first column is session, where I put in a number. So the first time we run the program, I'll put in a 1. The second time we run the program, I'll put in a 2. So for all the people that I'm going to enter today, sorry, that should say a 1. I'll enter 1s in like this. And then, when we run the program in a week from now, I'll put in 2s for the second session and so on, right? And this way I can keep track of how many people were in each group and how they compare against each other, right? Now, here I have all of my questions, the 7 questions. Okay, I just typed them in across the top and I colored them blue just so I can keep track of them. Now, what I'm going to do is, you'll note that here I have 5 boxes. So I'm going to call this number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5. And when I'm looking at the piece of paper, all I have to do is type in a number. So I'll just go across and type in 1, 2, let's say this, 5, 5, 5, 5, 5. Okay, so that's the score. If there's any comments I can put in, where it says good things, I could type in what the person wrote. How can we improve? Now, these fields, because they're qualitative and not quantitative, they're harder to analyze. There are ways that we can analyze them, and we'll get to that later. But the bottom line is that the ones that we're really concerned about now are the quantitative fields, the numbers, which are these guys, right? So you conduct a session, you hand out the survey papers, 20 people hand them back, and then you just go through and enter the 20 sets of numbers. And for each person, they run side to side, right? Okay, now the other 2 questions that we asked, how many coffees did you drink? We have a drop down. So it's easy to pick 1 to 5 plus, right? It's really difficult working with this plus thing normally, because if you were going to write 5 plus, Excel would think you're talking about 5 add something, like, to use it as a plus instead of an add instead of a plus. And the same thing's true here. So instead of typing yes or no, on or off, etc., this dropdown forces you to type in one of these options. You'll notice also that the first option we have is always blank, so that way, no matter where I click, they're always blank. And the last important thing is that if I scroll down, you'll see that I have my favorite green line down here on line 301. So that means that all the formulas between line 2 and line 300 I know to stop them all at this green line, right? So only the ones that are computed up here, will actually work. Whereas if I put a value down there, it won't be calculated. Okay, and I do that just to keep track of how big my sheet is possibly going to be, and to make sure that it runs quickly using my maximum thing. So for example, let's say you're going to run 5 sessions, and each one you'd have 20 to 30 people, then really you'd only need 100 to 150 spaces. I made 300 just in case way more people show up. Okay, I'm going to go through this step by step, and I'll show you how I put it all together. Okay, so next let's take a look at what this looks like with some data, right? So I went through and I filled some things out. You'll see they're all session 1 here. I put all the numbers in, and people didn't have that many comments. One guy wrote awesome pizza, another person said we want more pizza, another person said too many questions, and only a few people answered how many coffees do you drink, and only a few people told us if they want to meet on or off campus. We don't really have a lot of information, right? And as far as the last 4 questions. For the first 4 questions, everybody filled out everything. Okay, so let's look what that looks like on our results sheet. So session 1, it tells us automatically that we have 15 people attended. And basically what it does is it will go through and count how many ones do we have in this column, and it will give us the result. It's 15. Now, how many does that represent out of our whole population? 100%. How does it know? Because this field is going count if on the data entry sheet between A2 and A300, there's a 1, meaning session number 1, and then put that number in here. Whereas this bottom number is using counta, which goes it through and says data entry, if there's anything in those boxes, count it. So whether it's a 1, 2, 3, or 4, or 5, put it into this box. And what that means is that we could take this number and divide it by this number and find out what percentage it represents. So in this case, it's 100%. Now I just grabbed these numbers here on the side, and I made this handy dandy chart. So it says how many attendees, session 1, overall. Now, if I was to go back into here and change a couple of these to 2s, you'll notice that session 2 already has 2 people in it, and these graphs will update as it goes along. That didn't work the way I expected. Let's try to fix it. So I say equals this divided by that, and then we got 13%. Okay, so they might take a little bit of fixing, but that's the idea. All right, so let's go back and just change these to 1s. And the numbers are shifting just because I used a formula to fill them in. You don't have to worry about that. Normally, they'll stay the same when you enter them. All right, so let's keep on going. Here, I just put in the 7 questions that we asked, and I computed the average score. So I said, look at data entry, that data entry sheet, which is right over here, and look everywhere between B2 and B300. I put in the $sign so they don't shift, and tell me what the average is. So it's going to go in there and calculate this whole row, right? And it's on a scale of 5, 1 to 5. So it's going to come back and tell me the average score is 3.47. And I did that with each one of these things, right? Now, this chart will tell me for all of these are the questions, and these are the average scores in comparison to each other. And of course, you can go through and use all sorts of different elements to, add, let's say, data labels, if that's what works. Or you could change the design, or you could use a different kind of chart, whatever makes more sense. So if this one looks a little better, we could change it if that's more clear. And then, as usual, you could just copy it and paste it into your report for your Excel document, depending on whatever looks best and makes sense in terms of representing that visual data. Now, you remember we asked people how many coffees they drank. So here, we just counted the number of 1s. And to do that, we went in and we said count if on that sheet between K2 and K300, if there's a 1 in there, count it. Now, nobody answered 1, so it gave us 0%. For 2s, we only got 1, and for 3s, we only got 3. So that in total gives us 27% out of the whole sample. And to get these percentages, again, all we do is we do equals this cell, which is our number of 2s, divided by the total number, which is this 15 up here, and press enter. As there's more people that come in, the numbers on both sides will increase, and the statistics will automatically update. And here I just made a quick graph of coffee count showing how many people had 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 plus. Okay? And then finally, we asked people if they want to meet on or off campus. So 2 people said on campus, 2 people said off campus. Now this is 13% out of everybody who told us, and 73% didn't answer. And the way I did the bottom one is really easy. I just said, take the top number, which was 15, subtract 2 for on, 2 for off, whatever these numbers were, because I use these with count if on or off. And then I said, let's just see who's left. So it took the 15, subtracted 2, subtracted another 2, and then I was left with 11. So in this graph that I have here, you'll see that the majority of it is the gray unknown, and the 2 sections are the parts that I do know. And again, I could do all sorts of different ways to present this data. You know, whatever makes sense for this thing. I can also change the chart type and so on. Okay, now, how did this all happen? How does it work? Let's figure it out. All right, so this is going to take a little bit of time. I hope you're ready. Now, first thing is, you remember at the bottom, we added that green line. Now, you could add that green line anywhere, right? That's just my visual cue of when to stop when I'm dragging down. So I know that when I get to 301, I should stop. So I stop right here at line 300. Okay? Now, second of all, you'll notice something that when I scroll up and down, you see the numbers on the left are moving here, but the top isn't moving. And the way that I froze the top is, and again, in your version of Excel or whatever spreadsheet program you're using, it might be a little different, but the idea is the same. So somewhere in there, there'll be this freeze panes button, and I just press where it said freeze top row, and that keeps the top row from moving. So whether I go up or down, now sometimes you're also going to go side to side, right? Like, so for example, the first row, as the first column, you have the participants' names, right? And as you scroll over, you lose that thing. So you could freeze the first column or the top row or both. It depends. Right? You could freeze whatever place you need in order to scroll back and forth and still keep it on the page. Another helpful trick is oftentimes I go to View and I press New Window, and that will open up a second window of this. So I'm able to work in 2 tabs next to each other. With multiple monitors. So that's, or next to each other. So that's entirely possible to do as well. Okay, now we'll just go through a couple things, right? So the first one we'll do is these drop downs. So if you don't know how to do these, I'll give you the 2-second overview. You'll notice down here, I have a sheet called variable, or var, which I just stuck in there. And this is our coffee and account and on and off campus count. Okay, so that's where these automatically generated numbers come from when I put down that drop down. The reason why I do this is because if I was just typing things in, I could make a mistake, like I'm typing in no, but I accidentally put a J. When I'm trying to count all the no's, it's not going to know that this is one of the options. And then it's going to give me a miscount. But this way, because I can only pick from this list, then, you know, so people often ask me, like, let's say you have yes, no, and other, then right next to it, you make another column. It's not automatically calculated, but here, if there's, you know, a third option, you could just type it in on the side, right? So having yes, no, or other is always a possibility if your question has that other element. So let's start here. Let's make this one called coffee 2, right? So we'll do it over here. Okay, so we'll call it coffee 2, and we'll say, how many did you drink? And we'll stretch it out a bit. Okay, I'm just calling coffee 2 so I remember which one it is. We could color it a fancy color. And, all right, it's pretty fancy. Okay, and then this will give us this box. Now, what we want to do is, when I click here, it gives me a drop down 1 to 5. When I click here, I want to drop down 1 to 3. Okay, so to make that happen, I'm going to go into the variable thing. I'm going to go up to the top, and I'm going to type in coffee 2. Okay, and I'm going to type in 1, 2, 3. You'll notice again, I skipped 1 at the top, so that blank space shows up. Okay, so I'll highlight the blank space, 1, 2, and 3. And I'm just leaving this up here so I remember which one it is. Now, in the name box, right now it says D2. So when you have these boxes selected, however big the range is going to be, you go up there and you change the name. So I'm going to call it coffee 2. Okay, and I'll hit enter. And you'll notice that these 3 boxes are now called coffee 2. So if I click on this one, it's D2, D3, etc. But if I highlight all of them, it's going to default to this name, coffee 2. Okay? I'm going to go back to my data entry sheet, and I'm going to select all the way down until the green line. right, so I stop one before the green line, and I'm going to go to where it says data, and I'm going to click on this button, which says data validation. Again, in your version of Excel or in a different program, it might be slightly different, but generally you're going to have something called data validation in there. And here I'm going to say I want a list. Okay, I'm going to uncheck where it says ignore blank. I'm going to write equals COFFEE2 and hit enter. Okay, like magic, every one of my things now has 1, 2, 3 in there. Okay, being grabbed from that other list. So going back to the top of the sheet, for the first person, I could write a 1, a 2, or a 3. And then, like you'll see in other videos, we can use a formula like COUNTIF to go through this column and count how many times there's 1s, how many times there's 2s, how many times there's 3s in order to give us back a number. Or if you're a little more advanced, you could use a pivot table to do that as well. Okay, same thing here for do you want to meet on campus? The options are on or off, or yes or no, or whatever. We could do the same thing here. So here we have this variable called on campus, and that's where the on and off come from. Okay, in the results sheet, we're able to go through. Let's look at an example of that here. So we do equals count if. So count if the criteria is met, and then I click on the sheet and tell it what the range is. So in this case, I clicked on my first sheet. I dragged all the way down to 300. So I have in here A2 to A300, and then in the quotes, I put what I'm looking for. In this case, I was looking for a 1. So I put in 1, and it comes back and says, oh, there's 15 ones. Then I say down here, add them all up using counta, look at everything in there and tell me how many there are, and it says, hey, 15. So by dividing this top number with the bottom number, I get 100%. Okay? And if we look at other places, like here, it's going to do the same thing, basically, right? It's going to go through and look, hey, how many times does it say 5 plus? Or how many times does it say off? Or how many times does it say on in that range? And that's where these numbers will come from, right? So it might take a couple tries to get used to it, but once you get the hang of it, it's really easy to put in all the data. So basically, we went from this sheet, which has our 5 boxes on a scale of 1 to 5, and we are throwing them into the sheet like this, so it's really easy to put in the data. And we put in some of the comments that we can gather for later. And then we got some of the numbers from these statistics. Now, when we're writing a report and you're describing what you found, so you'll notice that all the people who came in, right, so the 15 people who signed up, they gave us all the numbers. So all these numbers are out of 100% of our people. Whereas, do you want to meet on or off campus? This is really a much smaller group because not everybody answered, right? So you can't say, 50% of people said on and 50% of people said off. You could say, of the people who answered, 50% of people said off campus and 50% of people said on campus, right? Same thing's true with, a number like this, like how many coffees did you drink? You can't say, oh, the average was, 2.75 because not that many people actually answered. It's actually the average of the people that answered and so on, right? That's just important to keep in mind because it depends what your sample size is to how you generalize the numbers. But once you have these numbers, it's really easy just to click on them and insert a chart. And there's all different kinds, whatever expresses what data you're trying, whatever makes most sense for what you're trying to do. And then when you write about these numbers and you're explaining to your funders or stakeholders what you're doing, all you have to do is use those numbers and copy and paste these charts into, let's say, Microsoft Word, and you're able to make a really easy, good-looking report very simply. Okay, so you could use this for surveys, and you could use this for program evaluation, and a whole bunch of other purposes. So anytime that you're asking people questions, you're able to not only enter them into the sheet, but the cool thing about this sheet is that you're able to capture multiple sessions, and then later on, once we have all those numbers in, we can actually compare how many people came to each session, what the responses were for each session, not just the averages across all sessions, which is what this is. We could look at what the average scores were for each section, right, using if statements and an array. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you join us back soon. Thank you.